Morning again. Like I said, I'm going to keep my volume down a little bit. I've woke up this morning with a sore throat. I promise I'm not contagious. I've got allergies, and then the fan ran last night. I've developed a sore throat. But if I'm not careful, I won't have anything for this afternoon. So just bear with me. If you didn't understand something, just come up to me afterwards, and I'll tell you exactly what I said. So. If you want to turn with me to Psalm 71, 71st Psalm. You know, some psalms like the 23rd Psalm always sound familiar. Somebody starts it and almost inevitably you can almost finish it just because we've become so accustomed to many of the Psalms. Some of the most beautiful Psalms are Psalms of sorrow and Psalms that were written during a time of tribulation or trouble. And they sound familiar if we hear or we read them, but there are some that we don't know quite as well. I dare say most people have never really done an in-depth study of the Psalms, but there's some beautiful passages found in the Psalms, and as we know, all Scripture is profitable. It all can benefit us in some way, shape, or form, and Psalm 71 is one example. It's written from a perspective of an older person. As a matter of fact, in verse 9 it says, "Do not cast me off in the time of my old age. Do not forsake me when my strength is spent." Now, if you read that, you might think that he's asking God to remember him later down the road at a later time, at a future date, but he's not. He's saying, don't forsake me now. Don't forsake me now that my strength is spent. Don't cast me off now in the time of my old age. So this is written from the perspective of an older person. And the 71st Psalm describes how one person leaned on God throughout his entire life, from the time he was young to the time that he was old, and he was strongly supported by God throughout his entire life. And that brings me to the topic is lean on his arms. And we all know the song, we've sung it many times, lean on his arms, lean on the mighty arms. And that it goes to show that even in the time of the age of the psalmist, he leaned on the arms of God. You know what? We're urged to do the same thing even today. All right. I find the faith and the imagery in this psalm to be very helpful and very encouraging, and I think you should as well. Let's look at some of the things. The psalm begins. Let's see. Hang on. It was working, I promise. It was. I saw it. DJ even showed me it lit green, but apparently, can we do it from up there? Okay. All right. Slide number 2, please. Slide number 2. The psalm begins, "In you, O Lord, I take refuge." Hang on a second until we get pulled up. All right. "In you, O Lord, I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me and rescue me. Incline your ear to me and save me." Next. "Be to me a rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress. Rescue me, O my God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of the unjust and cruel." Next. "For you, O Lord, are my hope, my trust, O Lord, from my youth. Upon you I have leaned from my birth." And we'll remember that in just a moment. "I have leaned upon you from my birth. It was you who took me from my mother's womb, and my praise is continually of you." Next slide. Now, what does it mean to say, or to be able to say, not just to say, but to be able to say, "For you, O Lord, are my hope, my trust, O Lord, from my youth. Upon you I have leaned from my birth"? Now, we have to notice that this is first-person speech to the Lord rather than a third-person speech about the Lord. In the next slide, the statement is not "the Lord is my hope," but "you, Lord, are my hope." The psalmist is not speaking to us and saying, the Lord is my hope, and he's not giving us a speech about who the Lord is. He's talking to God himself, and he's making sure that God understands. He's wanting to affirm to God that the psalmist... Now, another thing is this. The psalmist in this occasion is David. And likely that this psalm was written around the time that Absalom was seeking to overthrow and usurp the throne away from David. So we see David wrote some of his most beautiful psalms when he was in times of turmoil and times of sorrow and times of strife. He wrote the 23rd Psalm when he was running from Saul. And we read how beautiful those things are. And even in the midst of his shame and his distress and his sorrow, he still acknowledges that God is the one that sustains him. And as God sustained him through the good times in his life, he also sustains him through the bad times in his life. But this psalm was likely written when Absalom sought to overthrow him. Now you think, what could he possibly have good to say when this is going on? What possible light at the end of the tunnel? What silver lining can you find in this cloud? And he said, and basically David is saying, even in the bad times, you are still the one that I lean upon. I don't have to worry. I don't cast my hope on anyone else. I don't rely on anyone else. Because if you think about it, David, if nobody else, David should have been able to rely on his own family. And he was unable to rely even on his own family. But David said, there is one that in spite of everything else, I don't have to worry. Because God is my refuge. God is my shield. I will rely on God because God alone is going to sustain me. God alone is going to be there. He is steadfast and He's never going to leave me. He is always going to be there for me. It's important for us to remember that as David did, if we have a friend in God, then God is going to be there for us. God is always going to remain steadfast, and we will be able to lean on His arms. Next slide. Verse 17 proclaims, O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. Next slide. Here he's saying the psalmist doesn't just know about God, the psalmist knows God himself. Once again, it gets into the idea about making a speech about somebody versus acknowledging what the psalmist himself knows about God. Did David know about God? Was David aware of God? I'm not talking about just aware of his existence. Remember, he has already had to rely on God through many hard times. The problems that he had with Saul were not the only ones that he had in his life. Weren't. He was in fear for his life from Saul, but you remember he also wrote several of his psalms in the sorrow that he felt from his firstborn being taken from him because of his dalliance with Bathsheba. So we see this pattern with David. From the very beginning, he has always relied on God. It was because of God that he was able to deliver the sheep from the bear and the lion. It was because of God that he was able to go up against the Philistine Goliath and slay him with just one stone. It was because of God that he was able to avoid capture by Saul and death by Saul's hand. It was because of God that he was able to ascend to the throne in the manner that he was supposed to ascend to the throne. It was because of God. And you could go throughout the life of David and you could see this pattern of behavior when it came to David. And, more importantly, a pattern of behavior when it came to God. Because as David's behavior did not always take a linear path. We always like to think of it when we become New Testament Christians, that our path is going to be a linear one. We're going to start here. I'm going to do it from your perspective. We start here as Christians, and our path is just like this. It's straight up. We're just ascending to heaven. And slowly but surely we go up. That's not the way it works, is it? Is it? It's not. It'd be nice to think that. It'd be nice to think that we never have ups and downs, but that's not the way that it is. We're human, and we sin. We fall short of the glory of God. But in order for it to be shown that we fall short of the glory of God, there has to be a glory of God that is constant. It never wavers. God doesn't do a linear line. His is straight. Or God's not a vertical line. His is straight across. It's horizontal. It doesn't change. It doesn't waver. It never moves. God's glory is perfect, and it is always steadfast, and it continues on. But that's not the way we are, is it? We start here, and we go up. Man, we're excited. We're New Testament Christians. We're excited. We're zealous for the faith. We're going to change. And it's always in our mindset when we become Christians. We're going to change the world. We're going to change our little portion of this world because and we tell ourselves this, and we fool ourselves when we say it, but we think this: I'm never going to fall away from God. I'm never going to fall away from God. But we're human, and we're imperfect, and we fall away from God. And our path more along the lines of this: we go up, then we go down, then we go up, and then we go down, and it's like this oscillating pattern throughout our lives. Now, as we get a little older, we sin a little less because we become a little bit more perfected. And our dips are not as low as they used to be. And our highs are a little bit higher than they used to be. And slowly we're trying to achieve this top line where God's glory is that never wavers. And we get close to it, and then, you know what? We become human again, and we engage in very human behavior. We engage in ungodly behavior, and that line goes down again. And then it goes up again, and it goes down again. And it's like that our entire lives. It doesn't change. Unfortunately, some people, they get one of these downward slopes, and they never recover from it. They never go back up. They just slowly sink. They slowly sink, and they go further and further away from God. But what David was wanting to acknowledge was that God's glory is constant, and it is eternal. It never wavers, even though his behavior did. He fell short, but he repented, and he came back up. And he sinned, and he fell short. And then he repented, and he came back up. And every time it was a desire to get closer to God because, and this is the important thing, is that he recognized that God was his sustainer. He could lean on the arms of God. He could not trust in anything else. And it's folly to believe that we can. We can't trust in that way in other people because they will fall short and they will let us down, but God will not. God is constant. So even in our times of trouble and tribulation, we can rely on God if we can rely on no one else. The psalmist is telling the world, my hope and my trust have been in God since I was a young person, and I'm not going to stop hoping and trusting now that I'm older. And I think if you ask a lot of older folks, especially older Christians, they'll tell you very, very, very pointedly that the reason that they are still faithful is because they could hope and they could lean on God when everyone else around them let them down. We could do the same thing. But this is what the psalmist is telling us. Next slide. Hope, the idea of hope. What is hope to us? Well, hope is a confident desire. As New Testament Christians, we have a hope, but hope is not just a matter of thinking that something might happen. Okay? There are people who hope that they might win the lottery. I don't, because I don't play. I can't win if I don't play. But there are people who hope that they might win the lottery. But you know what? There's not a confident desire. Confidence is a key. Confidence means that I believe that this is going to happen. I have a desire for something, and I'm confident that it's going to happen. Well, there are certain things that we can have hope in. Okay? We can have hope that the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow, because it always has. We can have hope that day is going to turn into night, and night is going to turn into day. That's the things that we can have hope in. But the most important thing that we can have hope in is that God is going to be there for us regardless of what happens. Regardless of how far we sink in that, on those valleys when we go further and further away from Him. The beautiful thing about it is, as we get further away, God doesn't go in the other direction. He stays right where He is. And He waits on us. He always waits on us. And He patiently waits on us. And He's not just waiting. He's not just waiting on us. He's expecting us to return. And He wants us to return. He desires us to return. He doesn't cast us off and say, well, it was a great experiment, it was a great trial, but it's just not going to work out, and I'm no longer interested in your soul. God remains constant, and He waits on us with an expectation. Much like the father and the prodigal son. That father had constant hope that his son was going to return, because he would stand there and he would look afar off, waiting to see him. That's what God is for us. That's the way God was for David. Even when David sinned and fell short of God's glory, He still waited on David to come back, to repent and come back to Him. But hope is a confident desire. And for people of faith, God is our source of hope. And many times He's our only source of hope. He is the only silver lining. He's the only light at the end of the tunnel is God. Because everybody else has betrayed us. Everybody else has forsaken us. Everybody else has left us where we are. But God remains there, and He is our hope. Next slide. First, we need to remember a couple of lessons. Probably three, if my voice holds out. First, we need to remember that a strong faith in and devotion to God is no guarantee against problems and complications in life. And for a lot of people, this is the hardest lesson to learn, is that when we become New Testament Christians, it does not guarantee us an easy life. As a matter of fact, it pretty much guarantees the opposite. It guarantees that we are going to fly in the face of popular culture. We are going to, as New Testament Christians, we are going to stand alone against the world. And we are going to be found wanting in the eyes of the world. We are going to be called all manner of things: intolerant, bigoted, discriminatory, hateful, bitter, angry, all of the things that of course we understand the world to be. This is what we're going to be called. That's what the world is going to see in us. And we are not guaranteed an easy life because we become New Testament Christians. But we need to remember this, the fact that we have something to lean upon. And from the context of this psalm, we need to remember this. From the context of this psalm, it seems that this individual, which was David, has devoted his life to God. But the very first verse of the psalm identifies God as a place of refuge for the psalmist. So David even says, "From my youth, I've been able to lean on you." But he also says that he's a place of refuge, which tells us that even David knew that his life was not going to be perfect. It was not going to be easy simply because he had Jehovah as a place of refuge. That just simply because he believed in God and trusted in God and put his faith and devotion into God did not mean that he was not going to need a refuge. It meant that because he believed in God and because he relied on God, that God could be a place of refuge. But you know what? It's so interesting that there are folks who will flat out tell you that they have no real use for God, they have no real use for religion, they have no real use for anything, but they'll be very quick to run to God when things get bad. And they believe that God, for some reason, will say, "You know what, everything else, don't worry about that. I know that as soon as I protect you from this, that you're going to go back into the world and you're going to do what you want to do." And that's their mindset. But we know that when we became New Testament Christians and we put our faith in God, because of that, when there are times of trial and trouble, God will be a place of refuge for me. We cannot, I liken it to this. We don't have a castle to run back to unless we build the castle in the first place. Do we? We have no place to run to unless there's a place there to run to. I know that sounds like circular logic, but it's the truth. We don't have a place to run for refuge unless we've gotten the place for refuge to run to. So how do we do that? We become Christians. And when we become Christians, we have a place of refuge because God has become our protector. God has become our anchor. God has become the place that we can lean on in times of trouble. And He's promised us that. And when God makes a promise, He is not slack concerning His promises as is the manner of some. But He's steadfast. He always protects us. He always backs up what He says He's going to do. Trust is a reliance on and a confidence in. And that's what we have in God. Next. Secondly, the psalm affirms that it's God's nature to provide refuge, deliverance, and support. It's in His nature. It's not something that He does against His will or He does in spite of His best intentions. That is in His nature. God has always been has been the place where people who call upon the Lord can go to. It's part of His very nature. You know, human nature is very fickle, is it not? You know, our human nature is many times one of making sure that we survive, self-reliance. You know, we're going to ensure our own survival even at the expense of someone else. And then you become a parent and you realize that there are others who rely on you and they lean on you in case there's time in times of trouble. They know that they have a parent that they can go to and they can rely on. And that's the case. But it is in God's very nature to provide a place of refuge. It's what He does. To lean on someone or something, whether it's a wall or a chair or God, means that we trust it's going to support us and hold us up. Why would you go up and lean against something that you know is going to fall over? It really is what it comes down to. Why would you put your trust into something that you don't have confidence in it staying upright and giving you the kind of support that you're after? Well, it's not human nature. What we do is we cast about and we look for something that is going to ensure our safety and our survival. And that's what God does. Have you ever had to, if you want to raise your hand, you can. Has anybody ever had to do one of those trust falls, where team building exercises where you're standing there and you lean back and then people catch you and you certainly hope they're going to catch you? Has anybody ever done one of those? I had to do those in a couple of college, when I would go to college in orientation. We did these trust exercises. And what they did was they got us out at this youth camp, and they had this platform built. It wasn't a tall platform, but it was big enough, about 6 feet off the ground, tall enough. And they had a big group of people they stood underneath on one side of this thing. And the whole point of this trust exercise is, do you believe that the people that you're entrusting to catch you are going to catch you? Well, it was a Christian school. I had no reason to believe that these people would drop anybody. So yeah, I kind of cast my trust on these people, not really even sometimes knowing their names. I mean, this is orientation. So we stand up on this platform, and sure enough, everybody gets up there, and there's people down below, and we always try to get the bigger guys in the center, and everybody else off to the side. But we wanted to make sure that these people never hit the ground. So we get up there and we drop, one after the other. Every single person got up there and they dropped because of this trust exercise. And I believe out of all of the people that did this, and there's probably 150, 200 people in our freshman class, I think they only dropped 2 people, and it was because really people weren't paying attention and they weren't putting everything all of their attention and focus into what was going on. But it just went to show that sometimes you can do that. And when you truly trust people, that's what you're going to do, because that's the exercise. What would it have been if we had got up there and said, I don't trust any of you people, I'm not going to drop off this thing. I don't know you. I don't know who you are. I don't know your abilities. You certainly don't know me. Why in the world do I think that I could trust you? Why would I put my trust or my hope into you people? Well, contrast that with God. While I have a group of people over here that I don't know, that some of them I've only met that day, I would have no real reason to believe or trust in them, but I was willing to put my health into their hands, literally, my health into their hands, by falling off the back of this thing. Now, think about our relationship with God. At a very young age, we decided that we were going to trust God in all aspects of our lives, no matter what it was. We're going to trust in Him. We're going to trust Him to help us make decisions. We're going to trust Him to help us through the difficult times in our life. We're going to thank Him for the good times in our life. We're going to rely on Him to see us safely through. While if I were going to trust these people to catch me as I fell off the back of this thing, why would I not trust God through some of the difficult times in my life? I was willing to trust these people with my very health, because let's be honest. At 6 feet, if I fell back and no one caught me, I could seriously get injured. I could really get hurt. But I didn't, because the people caught me. It's the same thing with God. It's in His nature to give us refuge. It's in His nature to give us support. It's what He is, and it's who He is. And it's in His nature because He's always promised that He will do so. God has always promised that He will support those who call on His name, those whom He calls His children. He's always promised this. He promised that to the Israelites as they left Egypt. He promised them, if you will keep my commandments, I will protect you. But if you leave my commandments, I will withdraw my protection from you. He's told that to New Testament Christians. If you love me and you follow my Son, obey His commandments, and I will protect you. Now, does that mean that physically we will never get hurt? It's not what He's saying. It means that we don't have to worry about our souls. We never have to worry about our eternal salvation, because God has promised that He is going to provide that foundation upon which we can lean. Last, I tell you what, I will say this, and this kind of brought it home to me. I don't know if has anybody ever watched the movie Forrest Gump. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that movie before. I've seen it several times. I don't know if you remember this, and I thought this idea, this concept. Remember his buddy when he was in the military, Bubba? Everybody remember Bubba? I don't know if you remember that scene where they're together and they're in the jungles of Vietnam, and he tells his friend, he said, "This is what you're going to do." He said, "I'm going to sit here and I'm going to lean up against you, and you're going to sit back there and you're going to lean up against me, and we're going to lean against each other so we don't have to sleep in the mud." And I thought that was so. I thought it was a very touching thing, because these were two guys who really had nobody other than each other to rely on. But if you remember what he says, he said, "This way we don't have to sleep with our heads in the mud." You know why we're a good partnership, Forrest? Because we're watching out for one another like brothers and stuff. Now you think about that. Who are you leaning on? Who are you leaning on? Who's keeping your head out of the mud? Who are you supporting and helping to keep upright? And whether we're married or whether we're single, whether we're old or young, we can be a source of support to other people, as God is a source of support for us. Psalm 71 teaches us that a strong faith and devotion to God is no guarantee against problems and complications in life. And lastly, we learn from the psalmist that all we need is we all need someone to lean on. Next slide. In verse 6, "By you I have been upheld from birth. You are he who took me out of my mother's womb. My praise shall be continually of you." So not only is the psalmist leaned upon God from his birth, he also confesses that it was even God who took him from his mother's womb. God has been a part of his life from the very beginning. He didn't put it on God later on in life, and he certainly didn't put him on as just a suit of armor to protect him from the troubles of this world. He's not something that we take off and we put on whenever we need something. He's somebody that we put our faith in from the very beginning, and we maintain that faith. And as we maintain that faith, God maintains his support of us. And the next slide. This realization of complete dependence on God is surely one that grew with his experience and age. As he saw it, he realized how important it was that he put on God at a young age and continued that dependence on God. Now, in our time, in our society nowadays, our society is managed in various ways to continue reducing God's necessity in human life, has it not? They put a great deal of time and effort, and we know that this is the devil at work. But the everlasting arms, they don't go away. They're eternal. And the idea of everlasting means no matter what the problem is, there's support there for that issue. God knows all. God sees all. He knows what we need, even before we even utter the words. He wants us to pray. You know, it's interesting. We're asked to pray to God even though he already knows what we need from him. He knows our needs even before we utter them aloud, but he wants us to come to him in prayer. He wants to make sure that we know that he's the one, that we say the words that he is the one that we need, even though he knows what we need even before that. Last slide. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30. Jesus invites us to call on him. In Matthew 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all ye that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You know, but he's talking about Jesus here. Remember, I and my Father are one. When we rely on Christ, we rely on God. We can't have God without the Son. Can't have the Father without the Son. So if we're relying on God, who do we need to rely on? We need to rely on Christ. Christ will carry our burdens. And because of him, our yoke is easy. Our burden is light because we rely on Christ. He said, "I'm going to ask you to go this far, and what you can't do, I'm going to do." You think the psalmist knew that? I think so. I believe so. He makes mention of it. He says, "I know. I've been able to rely on God from my birth all the way up through now, all the way up through my old age, and God has not yet failed me. He has not yet let me down. And I know for a fact that God will never fail me or let me down. Come to me, all ye that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He asks that even today. He's asking, you want to rely on God? Put your faith and trust in me. I want you to come to me. He offers that invitation. He's offered that invitation from the time he left his disciples, even to today. He is offering up that invitation. Come to me. Rely on me. Cast your cares upon me. I can handle it. He's asking that even today. If there's anyone who needs to call on the name of Christ, become a New Testament Christian this morning, we want to help you do that. If you want to lean on his arms, now's your chance. If you've never offered up your life to him in exchange for his support and for his encouragement and for his love and for his promises, you need to do that this morning. Whatever your need might be, we invite you to come while we stand and while we sing.